Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 1st of May 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, and myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're joined by Vanessa Beeley.
Right, we're going to get straight in. We've got a lot to cover today. We're going to get straight in with the Skripal affair. We haven't been on air for a couple of days, so let's just remind ourselves about this post left by Clive Ponting on Craig Murray's blog. Now, of course, Clive Ponting, former civil servant who ended up on the wrong side of the Official Secrets Act. In fact, the Official Secrets Act in its present form was created as a result of Clive Ponting's attempting to whistleblow on the General Belgrano sinking during before the Falklands War. But anyway, he left a comment on Craig Murray's post with regard to the Skripal affair. He said, "I've been reading the blogs for some time, but this is my first post. Like Craig, I was a senior civil servant, but in the Ministry of Defence, not the Foreign Commonwealth Office. I had plenty of dealings with all three intelligence agencies. It seems to me that the reason none of the mainstream media are doing any investigating or reporting of the Salisbury affair, apart from official handouts, is that the government have slapped a D notice over the whole incident, and it's not possible to report that a notice has been issued." Well, then that was originally posted, I think, on Friday last week. And over the weekend, Craig Murray updated that to include this tweet from Alex Thompson. This is not from the UK Column's Alex Thompson, but Channel 4's Alex Thompson, who had tweeted out on the 12th of March, about the only decisive public move by the authorities has been to censor mainstream media via a D notice last week from fully identifying Mr. Skripal's MI6 handler living nearby. That, of course, is Pablo Miller, and Craig Murray then today has posted something new where they tell you not to look. And what he's saying is at the very beginning of the Skripal incident, the security services blocked by D-notice any media mention of Pablo Miller and told the media not to look at Orbis and the Steele dossier on Trump, acting immediately to get out their message via trustees in the BBC and Guardian. Gordon Carrora, BBC's security correspondent, did not name the source who told him to say this, but helpfully illustrated his tweet with a nice picture of MI6 headquarters. Now, unfortunately, the picture of MI6 headquarters is chopped off the bottom of that graphic we have on screen at the moment, or the screenshot we have on screen, but it is there. Murray goes on to say a number of people replied to Harding's tweet to point out that this was demonstrably untrue. And this was a tweet about Pablo Miller having never worked for Orbis. So a number of people said that was untrue, that Pablo Miller had listed his employment by Orbis Business Intelligence in his LinkedIn profile. That profile had just been deleted, but Google search for Pablo Miller plus Orbis Business Intelligence without LinkedIn as a search term brought up Miller's LinkedIn profile as the first result. So there is evidence that Pablo Miller did in fact work for Orbis Business Intelligence, and of course that then does link him to the Trump dossier. Craig Murray ends up by saying, "We still have no idea who attacked Sergei Skripal and why, but the fact that right from the start the government blocked the media from mentioning Pablo Miller and put out denials that this has anything to do with the Christopher Steele and Orbis, including lying that Miller had never been connected to Orbis, convinces me that this is the most promising direction in which to look." So that seems like a reasonable comment, Brian.
Totally reasonable. And this is the game now, isn't it? You just follow what the government doesn't say or what the government tells you not to look at, and you must be on the trail for where the truth is.
Now, also mentioned by Chris Ponting was the issue of BZ, and I think the general consensus amongst the people that I'm speaking to is that the BZ angle is a bit of a red herring, that they're accepting the OPCW's view, position, that this is put into some of the samples in order to make a double-blind test sort of thing. But we came across this. Somebody sent us this over the weekend, which is from the website of the Clinical Services Journal. And it's quite an interesting article. It was published apparently on March the 5th. This was the day after the Skripal poisoning, and the headline is "Response Unit Called as Salisbury Hospital Declares Major Incident." And if we just highlight the third paragraph, It's talking about a man and a woman in central Salisbury having been poisoned by some material of some kind, and they don't specify what it is. But in fact, if you go to the Wayback Machine, as recently as April the 26th, and you look at the third paragraph of this article, at that point, they say, quite specifically, they identify the cause of the poisoning of the man and the woman. We don't know whether the man and the woman in this article is the Skripals, but it's the only major incident that I'm aware of in Salisbury on the day. And they're suggesting an opioid was used, and a particularly strong opioid as well, much stronger than heroin, for example. So I wrote to the editor of this journal and asked why the change, because, you know, I accept that early reports may have early diagnoses on them, and diagnoses may change. But what fascinated me was that change happened well over a month after the poisoning. So it happened after April the 26th. And that seemed like a strange time period for that change to take place. I've had no response from the editor of this journal, so I don't know what their reason for making that change was. And you've got to say, Brian, that if you're a media outlet, rather than going back and changing an article, it's always better, I think, to make a clear update. Yes.
But the other thing with that article, Mike, is that they are saying the hospital declared a major incident. And if that's the case, and you'd expect that to be the case if they assume that this was some form of nerve agent poisoning, that there would be a track record of what took place in the major incident, that hospital wards were cleared, that there were barriers put up. There was decontamination process put in place in the hospital. But of course, there's been total silence. But many people working in that hospital have said they simply did not see anything unusual happening. So we had a major incident, but people in the hospital said there was nothing unusual happening.
Okay, and we're just going to finish off on Skripal here, just with a bit of light relief, and that's from Sputnik, because apparently a farmer in Russia has decided that the best thing that he can do to make fun of the whole situation is to specially brand one of his forms of sunflower oil. It's the third one on from the left there, and he's decided that he's going to name his new brand of sunflower oil Novichok, and he's given it a great brand and so on.
And of course, the beauty is that if you should actually spill some of this on your clothes, Mike, you simply use a baby wipe from Britain, as recommended by Public Health England. You use a baby wipe to wipe it off.
Absolutely. Let me just welcome Vanessa Beeley to the programme. Welcome to the programme, Vanessa. What do you make of would you buy Novichok if it was on sale in Britain?
Oh, definitely. if only for novelty value, yes, definitely. I'm sure it'll be worth a lot more in 10 years' time.
Yes. Right, now look, let's have a look at what Mr. I was going to say Blofeld there, but Mr. Netanyahu has been up to.
55,000 pages. Another 55,000 files on 183 CDs. Everything you're about to see is an exact copy of the original Iranian material. Well, tonight I'm here to tell you one thing. Iran lied. Big time. After signing the nuclear deal in 2015, Iran intensified its efforts to hide its secret nuclear files. In 2017, Iran moved its nuclear weapons files to a highly secret location in Tehran. This is the Shorabad district in southern Tehran. This is where they kept the atomic archives, right here. So let me tell you the history of this material. We've known for years that Iran had a secret nuclear weapons program called Project Ahmad. We can now prove that Project Ahmad was a comprehensive program to design, build, and test nuclear weapons. We can also prove that Iran is secretly storing Project Ahmad material to use at a time of its choice to develop nuclear weapons.
So Vanessa, quite a staggering presentation from Mr. Netanyahu there, and it seems to me that taking photographs of box files now constitutes evidence.
I mean, this was a classic presentation. I mean, I think you were right in the first place when you said it was a presentation by Blofeld. I mean, this would be pure comedy. This would be comedy store standard if it were not quite so serious. I was actually looking through some articles by Elijah Manier and by Moon of Alabama this morning, and I recommend people to go and look at both those sites and to follow them. But Moon of Alabama in particular laid out the timeline leading up to this speech. First of all, of course, Trump wants to end the nuclear agreement. General Joseph Votel, the commander of CENTCOM, has just visited Israel. Yesterday, the former CIA director and now Secretary of State, Pompeo visited Israel. And then, of course, this was followed by what is a suspected, although I don't think it's been confirmed by Israel yet or by anyone fully, but a suspected bombing of ammunition stores close to Hama in Syria by what is suspected to be the GBU-39, the American manufactured bunker buster type bomb that is small enough to avoid the detection by the air defense systems that Syria has. That was delivered, again, this is based on information coming out of Syria, but is not confirmed, delivered by an F-35. So that could either be a US or potentially a French or an Israeli jet. But certainly in the videos that we watched, we could hear a jet overhead. So that sort of negates the idea that it might be a land missile from Jordan, for example, which was another theory that was being floated. The Israeli Defense Minister Lieberman just visited Washington, D.C., and then we're followed by Netanyahu's extraordinary presentation. And also very interesting that at the same time, of course, we have Bolton recently appointed, and Bolton since I think around 2000 has been working for the Zionist push for a war in Iran. And in a recent speech, he made the extraordinary statement about the need for regime change in Tehran, and that in 2019 they will be celebrating in Tehran. And we have, of course, the three Johns lined up, John Bolton, John Kerry, and John McCain, who have consistently supported the MEK, effectively a terrorist group that I think was removed from its terrorist designation by Hillary Clinton and embedded in Europe, in fact. Their headquarters or their biggest center is actually to the northwest of Paris, but they were embedded in Albania when they left Iraq.
Right. Well, so, Vanessa, just before we move on from Bolton, I've got this article here from the American Conservative on screen at the moment. The headline is "The Untold Story of John Bolton's Campaign for a War with Iran."
Yeah.
And one of the points that they're making in this, and I suggest people read it because there's quite a lot of information in here, is that Bolton actively conspired during his tenure as the Bush administration's policymaker on Iran from 2002 to 2004 to establish the political conditions necessary for the administration to carry out military action. And they make the point that there were attempts, or at least suggestions, of military action in 2007, 2008, and 2011. That these were presented to the media as these events as leading up to attacks on Tehran, but they were effectively bluffs, is the point that they're making. This doesn't seem like a bluff this time.
No, I mean, I think the appointment of Bolton was certainly cause for concern. In that article, I would recommend everybody reading. It's by Gareth Porter, and it gives tremendous insight into Bolton's role, both previously and I think presently, into the targeting of Iran for the ubiquitous regime change. But I think what is also important, of course, is that in Syria also, the US presence in Syria is in order to prevent Iranian presence. So the pushback against Iranian influence in both Iraq and in Syria, because let's not forget that in Iraq, the Hashd al-Shaabi forces have been instrumental in defeating ISIS in Iraq. But the US occupation, which is now, of course, being power multiplied by France and by Britain, and by their proxies on the ground, the Kurdish separatist factions and a number of previously terrorist factions, including ISIS, we believe, that are being trained up as proxy forces to maintain the occupation inside the northeast of Syria, where about 30% of Syrian territory. So all of this is designed to push back against Iranian influence and the threat of both Iran and Hezbollah, of course, although, again, if you go to Elijah Manier, follow him on Twitter or read his most recent article where he talks about Hezbollah withdrawing its troops from Syria and if you like, coming back into Lebanon to defend themselves as to what they perceive as the potential of an attack on Lebanon as being an Iranian, or rather as Hezbollah being an Iranian proxy. And because Hezbollah now has greater support from the current Lebanese government, then Lebanon is a potential target also.
Yeah, okay. Now, related to this then, you mentioned McCain a second ago, the Sedona Forum has been hosting Raed Saleh, the head of the White Helmet. So there are links here.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was talking to a couple of people about this morning. I mean, you know, it's an extraordinary demonstration. We had Heather Nauert quite recently, the US State Department spokesperson, clearly stating her gratitude, or the US government's gratitude, to the White Helmets for the job they did for them or are doing for them inside Syria. Now we see Raed Saleh, who was deported from the United States from Dulles Airport in April 2016 for his extremist connections, being awarded some kind of accolade by John McCain, who of course has been instrumental in the majority of the militarist projects in the region. At the McCain Institute Sedona Forum, which is a private invitation-only forum. So, I mean, this just gives an indication to the extraordinary height that this organization has been propelled. And I mean, Raed Saleh was a mobile phone salesman before he took over control, if you can call it that, of this propaganda construct predominantly created by the British Foreign Office, of course.
Yeah. Now, look, just very briefly, what's your view on upcoming events? Are they going to try and operate this policy piecemeal, sort of move out of Syria and look at Iran, or are they going to just look for a general breakdown of the region at this point?
I mean, that's, you know, it's very difficult to predict. I mean, Syria now it's broken the imperialist stronghold on Damascus, for example. The liberation of eastern Ghouta and the ongoing liberation of the southern suburbs of Yarmouk will effectively destroy the British, US and French alliance project inside Syria, because we're understanding from intelligence on the ground that troops were being mobilized, or terrorist troops were being mobilized, to reinforce the factions in the east of Ghouta and to basically attack Damascus. And that's why Russia and Syria diverted the military campaign to liberate eastern Ghouta in the time that they did, in a very rapid campaign there. So basically, the back of the imperialist project in Syria has been broken. The Syrian army is moving forward to victory after victory. Idlib is largely under control of Turkey. The terrorist factions that are there are largely under control of Turkey. Turkey is, to a degree, playing both ends against the middle, but it's still a potential, although rather kind of shaky, ally of Russia and Iran because of its economic and resource interests. And then we have the southern areas of Dadar, which of course will bring the Syrian army in direct conflict potentially with Israel and the United States. So it's still a very tense situation. You have the US occupying in the northeast. They're not going to relinquish that occupation, I don't think, until they feel that they've driven Iran out of the region. So we have a complete impasse on that, because equally Iran will not leave Syria at the behest of the Syrian government until the US have left Syria.
Yeah.
So, I guess we're reaching again one of these tipping points. Israel seems determined to provoke a reaction apart from their normal hit and run. They seem to be, with this announcement by Netanyahu, they seem to be ramping up the pressure against Iran.
Okay.
So,
yeah. Okay. Right. Let's just have a brief look at Yemen then, Brian.
Yeah, we come in from this angle. So this was a shot of BBC News page this morning, and my eye immediately caught this little cartoon here, the girl with the strawberry ring. So we've got very serious news articles in a fairly standard format, and then right in the middle of it, bang, a cartoon. This is obviously designed to draw people's attention in. But they're starting to blur reality. Now, you took a little clip of this to show people exactly where they were going.
Yeah, it is an amazing propaganda piece, and it's animated, as you can see. So the girl with the strawberry ring, who is she and why does she refuse to take off her plastic ring? So it doesn't begin as a cartoon, but it's about this little 6-year-old girl, Ala, who is clearly being fed through a tube. And as we move down through this piece, it becomes more cartoon-like as we go. Yeah. But Ala's not alone, apparently, because she is with lots of other children and families who are going hungry in Yemen, and they start to give some statistics about the food shortages, the disease, and so on. So we can see what it's like here. But Vanessa, this is a pretty egregious piece of propaganda because, of course, they completely ignore the reasons for why children are suffering in this country.
Are being destroyed, and supporting UN sanctions, illegal UN sanctions, and resolutions that are enabling the starvation and the blockade of 27 million Yemenis. I mean, it's just, and meanwhile, mainstream media is virtually ignoring the plight of the Yemeni people.
Yes, indeed.
Well, let's reinforce what Vanessa has just said. Let's have a look at what the BBC has said in its own article. So this was the headline here, Yemen crisis, who is fighting whom? And if you have a look at what they're saying, alarmed by the rise of a group they believe to be backed militarily by the regional Shia power Iran, Saudi Arabia and 8 other mostly Sunni Arab states began an air campaign aimed at restoring Mr. Hadi's government. What an amazing sentence that is. The coalition received logistical and intelligence support from the US, UK and France. So there we are, absolutely linked in. And then down in this piece here, it said the launch of a ballistic missile towards Riyadh in November 2017 prompted the Saudi-led coalition to tighten the blockade. There's your blockade. And the coalition said it wanted to halt the smuggling of weapons to the rebels. The UN said the restrictions could trigger the largest famine the world has seen for many decades. Well, that's exactly what's been triggered. And who's triggered it? Saudi, US, UK and France. So that's pretty clear. Yeah. But let's come back to the storytellers of this cartoon, because these people are always in the background. So let's bring them to the fore. We've got this lady, Lucy Rodgers. Now, she's been working with the BBC a long time, but if you look at what she's talking about, collaborating, and she's a storyteller. So news, very serious news, death, famine, war, has now become a story, but you need to make it into a cartoon. So we bring in this young lady, French lady, Alice Grenié, and she's been working with the BBC for 7 months, but she's a digital expert, and she's obviously helping produce these graphics. So what is this about? This is a new form of propaganda, Mike, I think. What the BBC's not talking about is these sorts of links where we've got Theresa May's husband linked into Capital Group, shares in BAE shares going up, the more weaponry that's dropped. They're not reporting on this sort of thing. This is Theresa May's comment after some questions were asked about Mr. May. She said Mr. May is involved in the development of Capital Group's retirement solutions. He's not an investor, but consults with other capital associates on retirement products and solutions.
Of course, but he doesn't benefit at all from...
No. But the BBC not reporting that. So we're going to stay on the case of the BBC's propaganda. We're very interested in war becoming cartoon. And if anybody else has got more information on the journalists producing this stuff, please let us know.
Right, moving back to Syria, just we've got Penny Mordaunt here, who of course is the International Development Secretary. I was giving a briefing to the Commons yesterday. She said in the 8th year of the conflict, the plight of the Syrian people remains grave. The Syrian regime appears to have no intention of ending the suffering of its own people, despite the opposition placing no conditions on peace negotiations. So the lies in Parliament continue, but let's keep going. She talks about the barbaric attack in Douma, about the World Health Organization receiving reports that hundreds of patients arrived at a Syrian health facility on the 7th of April with the signs and symptoms consistent with exposure of toxic chemicals. Talks about Assad and his backers, Russia and Iran, attempting to block every diplomatic effort. But don't worry, because Britain is clear. We must defend the global rules-based system that keeps us all safe. And Penny Mordaunt welcomes the support that we've had from members of this House and from the international community. She said, we will work with the UN and the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons to create a new independent mechanism to attribute responsibility for chemical weapons attacks. So she doesn't say investigate chemical weapons attacks. This new independent mechanism is all about attributing responsibility. And, well, is this a predetermined responsibility? This isn't clear. She goes on to say, in wielding its UN veto 12 times, Russia has given a green light to Assad to perpetrate human rights atrocities against his own people. A regime that has continued to obstruct aid to eastern Ghouta and removes medical supplies from rare and aid convoys that do get in. So she's lamenting the fact that her tame terrorists aren't getting what they need. And she says, we also want to adapt what we do to the new reality of this war. That is why I've announced the new Creating Hope in Conflict Fund with US aid to work with the private sector to find new technology to save lives in conflict zones, and Britain will establish a humanitarian innovation hub to develop new capabilities to hinder regimes who appear determined to slay innocent men and women and children. In northwest Syria, so again back to her terrorist friends, an intensification of hostilities and the arrival of an additional 60,000 people from eastern Ghouta is stretching scarce resources. Today, 65% of the population of Idlib, over 1.2 million people, have been forced from their homes. And she said this, we will focus on education, making sure that every child in the region has access to quality education, even in the most trying of circumstances. And Vanessa, this was something that the BBC was covering on the Today programme a couple of days ago, and I found it particularly disturbing because they were very excited about the opportunities with millions of people, refugees in Turkey, in northwestern Syria, in other countries around about, and the opportunities this gives for them to get a good Western-based education. And I thought to myself that really this is not necessarily in the best interests of Syria.
No, I mean, it's extraordinary. I think, was it 450 million that Mordaunt was talking about sending into Idlib?
Yes.
I mean, to the so-called humanitarian workers and rescuers, blah, blah, blah. So we know exactly where that money is going to go. And we can easily speculate that, just as has happened previously, of course, that financing is going to end up in the hands of some of the more extremist and militant factions in the area. But heaven forbid we mention that. It's going to be described as a conspiracy theory, of course. But what is extraordinary, I mean, she talks about the people that have come from eastern Ghouta, but of course what she doesn't mention are the 63,000 that have returned home to eastern Ghouta since the liberation, and those that remained, of course, in areas like Douma and Sakba under the Amnesty and Reconciliation Agreements, chose to actually stay in those districts and not evacuate to Idlib. Of course, this is the thing, in the Western public is fed what is effectively probably about 10% of the reality on the ground, and even that 10% is then distorted and misdirected. So it's they've done an excellent job both within the government and within the state-sanctioned media to distort the actual events on the ground inside Syria.
Well, look, let's look at some of that distortion, and here's an example of it from The Guardian this morning. The ruins I saw in Syria stand as a rebuke to Western inaction. This is an article by a lady called Diana Darke, D-A-R-K-E. Well, she didn't just produce this, because she also produced an audio piece for a BBC programme called From Our Own Correspondent, which has its own Twitter feed. What we find is them tweeting this today. A bus full of priests and peers was Diana Darke's cloak of disguise as she tried to look beyond the official line on a visit to Syria, and a link to the From Our Own Correspondent clip. Now that is Diana Darke on the top right there. But this seems like the BBC admitting to using pretty scurrilous tactics to get one of their people into Syria to produce what?
Well, I think what is really interesting, and also The Guardian might, because of course The Guardian is probably since about the end of 2012, when it basically got rid of any half-decent journalists and has only stuck with those that are prepared to produce the narrative that fit inside the British foreign policy framework. But my first question would be, I mean, she actually mentions in the Guardian article that her visa application in February was refused despite the fact that she has a house in Damascus. So my first question would be, why did the Syrian government consider it necessary to refuse her application, and why did she then sneak in with a delegation that was organised by our friend, the Reverend Andrew Ashdown? She then basically cites the Amnesty International fake news about Sedona that has been largely debunked by people like the former ambassador to Syria, Peter Ford, and actually Amnesty International themselves have sort of backpedaled on that report. She goes on to mention the cluster bombs dropped on Hajar al-Aswad. But of course, she doesn't mention that this, and one, how on earth does she determine that they are cluster bombs? That's the first thing. And secondly, she does not mention the fact that this is a campaign to liberate those areas from ISIS occupation, nor does she mention the use of ISIS rockets, or ISIS firing rockets into the southern districts of Damascus, killing a number of civilians and injuring many others. She repeats the Hariri myth of the Syrian government being involved in the killing of Hariri, which is another Guardian byline to keep the pressure up on Assad. But what is very interesting, and this is what I picked up on this, one of her final comments, she advocates the cutting of Russian ties. Now, if we go back to the leaked diplomatic cable, from a British diplomat based in Washington. If we read through that leaked cable, in there, one of their main priorities is about getting the Russians to let Assad go. So here it's very interesting. Here, Darke is basically echoing intelligence language over Syria. And if we read the sort of final paragraph in the publication of those diplomatic cables, ultimately the British cables perfectly reflect the Western strategy in Syria to sabotage the Sochi peace efforts, to add two new wars to the Syrian crisis, that of the Turks against the Kurds and those of the Israelis against Iran and Lebanese Hezbollah. The Americans have never admitted their military defeat in Syria and do not want to let go, and especially their main strategic objective, said a senior French diplomat, is that of dismantling of Syria, just as they did in Iraq and Libya. Their desire is to arm the Kurds to control the oil areas of eastern Syria in order to influence the political and economic reconstruction of the country. Peace is not for tomorrow. So I think the most important thing is that she's basically advocating and endorsing further pressure on President Assad or on the Syrian government. And she is also pushing the cutting of Russian ties. So, as I said, there's clear parallels between what she is saying and what these leaked cables put forward as the plans that were hatched in January of this year.
Okay, and well, look, we'll move on to the most recent attacks against you and Piers Robinson, Tim Hayward, and so on. This is from Brian Whitaker, former Guardian journalist. Vanessa Beeley, the Syrian conflict's goddess of propaganda. I always knew you were a goddess, Vanessa, but this is amazing. But also, amazingly enough, yesterday, the Huffington Post pushed this out: UK academics to debate if reporters in Syria are breaking terrorism laws, where they directly attack Patrick Henningsen. But the main focus of the attack, of course, is the media on trial event.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Brian Whitaker's article was extraordinary. I mean, I think, give him his due, he did at least try to deconstruct one of my articles, which is a first for all of these smear attacks. However, he did cherry pick the items that he wanted to try and disprove. But I think what's fascinating about Whitaker is that here we have somebody who's declaring everything to be a conspiracy theory, and yet who peddled the gay girl in Damascus story back in 2011 as fact. And in fact, Phil Greaves on Twitter in the last few hours has just tweeted out, "He is a conspiracy theory, Brian. Brian and key members of the Guardian staff knew all along that the gay girl in Damascus was a white male Yankee dilettante in Edinburgh, and they were paid by MI5 to promote it in order to demonize the Syrian government in preparation for NATO's war." And Greaves has actually written another excellent article basically highlighting the fact that it was Whitaker who pretty much launched Elliot Higgins, of course, of Bellingcat fame, along with various other Guardian colleagues, and who also peddled a number of the lies that enabled the reduction of Libya to a failed state. Another Twitter person picked up on the fact that very early on, Brian had again promulgated the theory that Assad was leaving Syria for Russia, which was then, of course, proven to be another lie. So, what is extraordinary here, and Whitaker also put out a tweet saying that, yes, he accepted there had been a number of conspiracies against Iraq, but Syria really wasn't the same situation. So, I mean, the thing is that what I'm seeing is that these smear pieces are running out of ammunition. I mean, they didn't have much ammunition to start with, but they really are scratching the bottom of the barrel right now, and they're coming up with nothing. And actually, how I see it is that they're giving us great publicity leading up to media on trial event, and that's what we should be profiting from.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this was a direct attack on the media on trial event. So let's just remind everybody of that, taking place in Leeds, 27th of May, not too long to go now. Details at mediaontrial.uk, and tickets very reasonably priced at £10. So please get along to that if you possibly can. Now, Vanessa, yes.
Mike, I think it's important to also mention that Cynthia McKinney will be coming. That's been confirmed. So I think people should be,
okay, so that's hot off the presses, Vanessa. So I didn't know that. So on the Media on Trial events page, it does say that there would be a special guest speaker, so I guess that will need to be updated this afternoon, so that we can now announce that will be Cynthia McKinney. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, Vanessa, Duma.
Yes.
Tell us.
Oh, right. Well, actually, this is not Duma. Right, okay. This is Sakba. But never mind, it's close. It's all in Eastern Ghouta. No, I mean, I think what this was, obviously, I've only been back from Syria for about 4 days, and I need to put together all of the information and witness testimonies that I gathered when I was there, particularly against the White Helmets and their role in the alleged Duma chemical attack. But during my time there, I actually visited Sakba, which was another town in Eastern Ghouta. And here actually was pretty much the White Helmet Center and headquarters. And I have to say it's the biggest complex that I've seen since I've been researching the White Helmets. Now, what was interesting about this is that you had 2 buildings that were attributed to the White Helmets. The first was basically a carport and a supply and equipment building that they had clearly torched, tried to burn when they left, to try and burn and destroy any evidence against them. Those images that you can see are items of clothing, gas masks, etc., that were taken from that building that hadn't been destroyed by the fire. and a number of vehicles that I was able to photograph, etc. Posters relating to the local councils, which again we know are being funded by the UK Foreign Office via the Conflict Stability and Security Fund, and a number of other items that basically belonged to the White Helmets, as you can see there, one of their overalls. But what was interesting is that this building, where they held all their vehicles, was connected to this building that you can now see in the photograph by underground tunnels. This building was vast. I mean, it was on, I think, about 6 levels. But this was the residential and communications centre, and many of the communication satellites and dishes that we saw there had obviously been supplied by the West. I mean, many of them still had their labelling on from France and from a number of other EU member states. But what's then interesting, and if you the divide between these two buildings above ground were wheat fields. They were next to an irrigation channel, so they had water, they had food, and then behind the second building was the local electricity power station, so they were also in control of the power station. But then directly behind that was the Fayek al-Rahman bomb-making factory, which again was probably the most extensive in the whole of Eastern Ghouta. It had over 20 machines that had been adapted from, I think, making, I can't remember what they were making, but they'd been adapted to make various missiles that you can see. It was almost like a sort of missile graveyard down there. There you can see images of the Hell cannon, 2 or 3 of the Hell cannon that were erected onto platforms with wheels that they would move around to be able to target civilians in the Damascus city centres, which we know have claimed the lives of over 11,000 civilians and permanently disabled 30,000. So again, we see evidence that the White Helmets were working in clear collusion with Fayek al-Rahman, one of the more extremist militant groups that were occupying Eastern Ghouta. And you know that their center was pretty well established by the West as an intelligence construct, as an intelligence gathering construct, an intelligence relaying construct to the various state-aligned media outlets and think tanks and NGOs.
You mentioned the electricity substation. That's a view from the White Helmets building. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you know what we have once again is more evidence of the White Helmets being embedded right with the terrorists, with bomb-making factories, in control of infrastructure and so on. You have to wonder how much evidence the mainstream media needs.
Well, I mean, the fact is, Mike, they're not. I think if we have another D notice, it's going to be on the White Helmets, isn't it? I mean, you know, they're simply not touching this story in any shape or form. And so one has to assume that they're being told to protect it at all costs.
Yeah. Okay. Now, look, we're running out of time, but we'll run on through these a little bit. The next one that we wanted to highlight was this from the BBC. This is, I believe, this event took place in 2012, was it, or?
Yeah, 2012.
So Austrian UN peacekeepers investigated over Syria ambush, and what basically seems to have happened here is that a Syrian police patrol has stopped at an Austrian UN peacekeepers security checkpoint because they were investigating some stuff and they wanted to make sure that the UN peacekeepers knew what they were doing. So they stopped at this checkpoint, and they then were not told that they were going to walk into or drive into an ambush. And in fact, you can hear on the video that as they do drive into the ambush, as they are ambushed and as they are shot to death, you can hear the Austrian peacekeepers joking about it and laughing about it. Yeah. It's quite an unpleasant video. Have you any idea how this came to light in the first place?
Yeah, there are certain, I think in the two articles that I read from Inside Austria, there was a speculation that it was actually one of the peacekeepers themselves who had finally caved in and sent the videos and documentation to Falter, I think, the media outlet that received it. But yeah, I mean, this is an absolutely horrible event. I mean, 9 Syrian border patrol officers literally allowed to enter an ambush that these Austrian so-called peacekeepers knew was there. And actually, in one article, they described that the Austrian peacekeepers had actually been communicating directly with the smugglers or terrorists and had been giving them water and food. So, you know, I mean, this is just, it's hideous. And the fact that the BBC sort of tries to whitewash this atrocity is clear protectionism towards those UN peacekeepers. And remember, in 2012, this is when we would have been at the peak of the propaganda and demonization of the Syrian forces. So clearly, that filtered down to those UN so-called peacekeepers in the sense that they considered those Syrian forces to be the criminals and the smugglers, whoever they were, to be justified in shooting them.
Yeah. Yes, okay, let's move on then. AV9 taking place this weekend, Friday the 4th to Monday the 7th of May. And I suppose at this point, Brian, we should mention that the way the travel arrangements, you're speaking at this event, so the way the travel arrangements are working out, it looks like, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do a UK column news on Friday. But Monday, of course, was bank holiday anyway, so we wouldn't be doing a news. So we're only going to do news Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday this week, so that brings people up to date. Now, what's next?
Right, well, we're going to come back to the Strawberry Ring Girl, but from a very different angle. When I looked at this film clip, I was immediately struck by this image. Here's the little girl. She's got a nasal tube, nasogastric tube. She's being treated in a poverty-stricken Yemen war zone, but the tube is clean. If we just highlight what we're looking at here, we're looking at this tube. This tube is it looks a proper medical tube. Let's contrast it with the look of Alfie Evans in Alder Hey. This was one image that was taken by his parents at the state of this little boy under the care of Alder Hey Hospital. BBC, of course, not reporting any of this, but this is the one that I was just struck with this contrast. This is mould inside Alfie Evans' tube. BBC not interested in this. BBC will not give the truth out of this story, and yet we have a cartoon story being told about this little girl. I accept that the circumstances that Allah's gone through very serious, but the point is that the BBC showing utter bias in its reporting. This is another image of Alfie Evans soaked in urine inside that hospital, not reported by the BBC. And I'm sorry this is a bit gruesome, but I'm going to put it up again. This is the state of this little boy's face at one stage. If you want to see more, this is the actual video clip that's on YouTube. And I would say you need to watch it. And we'll advertise the Dying for Good Health NHS conference coming up on the 12th of May. If you haven't got a ticket, you need to get online and get a ticket. Those tickets are now going. And what more can we do? We've been asked, can we help expose what's really going on in the NHS and healthcare? And we've made every attempt to do that.
We're going to leave it there?
I think we should, yeah. So Vanessa, we'll say thank you very much for joining us. Really excellent analysis as always. We'll have a look and see what Brian Whittaker has to say after the UK column news today. I did just contact him while we were talking to say we weren't impressed with his journalism. That's it for today. Thank you very much to our viewers and listeners, and thank you very much for the encouraging emails that we've been getting in particular over the last few weeks saying keep at it. We'll be back tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.